with that, let me switch my sharing. Okay. Here we have the agenda, which I will also simultaneously attempt to put into the chat. Calling to order approval of agenda and the February meeting minutes. Are there any objections to approving the agenda and the February meeting minutes?
Hey, Paul, point
Yes.
of order. Are we at quorum?
I am unable to see right off how many people we have.
There are 32 people in the meeting. Quorum is 25 members for general business, 15 PCOs for PCO business. I know that at least a few of those in the meeting right now are not members, including myself. Thank you, redistricting.
Let me, well, let's do a, let's use the raise hand features. Those of you who are members of the 43rd, please raise your hand. So we got 16, 17 with me. So we are still not at, that means we are not at quorum yet.
It does mean that technically we do not have a meeting, and so we cannot perform meeting business. And I think that even extends to approval of minutes. But the rest of our agenda is still, I think there's still plenty of stuff on our agenda that's fair game.
Okay.
Mr. Chapman, may I ask you a question about your agenda?
Yeah.
My name is Kristen Ballinger, and I'm running for a retention election for King County Superior Court. I don't see myself on the agenda, so I think I might have gotten misinformation about coming tonight. So I wanted to know if I should stay and you could fit me in, or if I should just reschedule for another night.
I think we should be able to fit you in.
Thank you, Mr. Chapman. I appreciate it.
Okay.
Sorry for interrupting.
No worries. All right. Well, we won't approve the agenda nor the minutes, but we will persevere nonetheless. Everyone can put your hands down. Thank you. So with that, let me just start in with chair report. With redistricting, we do have new maps. The link is here in the agenda. You can click through. You can click through to see that. Let's see, 43rd. Sorry, my dogs are growling in the background. 43rd Town Hall, we have a recording of that. Again, just to remind people of that. Washington State Democratic Convention is June 25th. There's a caucus for delegates March 26th. We'll have more information on that coming up. Okay, and then with that, we'll go into guest speakers. I've had a request to move Adam Smith to the top of this. So we will hand it over to Representative Adam Smith to speak for a few minutes.
Thank you very, very much. I apologize for that. I'm
no worries.
East Coast and it's late here. I will try and be brief. I appreciate the time. Obviously, there's a lot going on in the world. I think the biggest thing that my office is focused on working with the district is as we're coming out of COVID, dealing with all the economic impacts of that. Inequality was an enormous problem in our country and our community before COVID, and it's only gotten worse since then. So we're dealing with income insecurity, housing insecurity, food insecurity. The CARES Act and the Recovery Act that were passed has, several, like $6 trillion in money to help drive out and help people. We're working with local communities on that. We were also able to just pass the appropriations bills. I give a special personal shout out to Rosa DeLauro, who's the House chair of the Appropriations Committee, for fighting her way through the Republicans to get that deal done and actually fund our government. It contains within it a lot of what we are calling congressionally directed spending, which is a euphemism for earmarks that are back. But from that, I was able to get some support to a number of community projects, in particular in our general community. I don't think it's quite in the 43rd, it's in the 37th. Africatown has a number of projects going on. We're able to get $2 million grants for different aspects of that, and really sort of working on that sort of community center approach. Low-income housing, access to healthcare, access to education and job training. A lot of excellent work is being done by community-based organizations to build those centers to support our communities, especially communities of color. And we are able to drive those dollars out to help them. And that's a huge part of our focus, is getting people back to work, getting them decent pay, and making sure we can start to get folks a little bit more opportunity in our community. That's a huge focus of what we're doing. I also have some funds in there for the Health One program, which is where we send out medical workers and social workers to respond to mental health crises instead of the police, to fund that portion of it, to give us that option. So we're really focused on that overall community issue as we wrestle with the challenges that have come out of the pandemic. Obviously, the rise in homelessness, the criminal justice reform, and also the crime problem that we do have throughout the 9th District. Those are the basic issues locally that we're working on. Nationally, Ukraine is dominating a lot of our thoughts. It is a very, very dangerous moment. It's sort of the end of the post-Cold War world. And we have to figure out how to reestablish a more peaceful world. The step that Putin took is pretty extreme. And we see every day what's going on in Ukraine. At the same time, as chairman of the Armed Services Committee, certainly we're trying to help Ukraine in any way we can. I'm also trying to make sure that we don't start World War III. We do not want the US and Russia or NATO and Russia to come into direct conflict. So talk of no-fly zones, of flying fighter jets over Ukraine. We can't have that, or the war will broaden, and you will have more nations suffering in the way that Ukraine is right now. We do want to support the Ukrainian people with humanitarian aid, and also we're getting them small arms and weapons to help defend themselves, stingers, javelins, anti-tank, to try to stop the invasion, while at the same time working on the diplomatic side. But this is a crucial moment for the global community to come together and try to figure out how we can have a more peaceful world going forward. And I'm very, very focused on that and working on that. Last thing I'll say, 2022, really important. Obviously, I'd love to have your support for my race. I appreciate that, but the real important part is that we hold on to the majorities in the House and the Senate. In our state, if you want to volunteer, Kim Schreier is the member of our delegation who is most in jeopardy. She's in a 50-50 district just to the east. And also Patty Murray has a pretty robust Republican challenge that has kind of gone under the radar. If 2022 turns out to be a difficult year for Democrats, that could be a more competitive race. So Patty needs your help as well. And overall, we need to have a strong message. And I think there's a lot that Democrats can run on this time. As I mentioned, the Recovery Act, the CARES Act, bills that really helped people, the infrastructure bill. The Biden administration and Democratic leadership were able to pass something that Congress had just been talking about for the last 15 or 16 years. So I think we should lean into the fact that the country is in better shape with Democrats in charge. We got a 3.8% unemployment rate. We've got rapid growth. We've got more jobs being created than have been created in a long time. There's a lot more work to be done. There's no question about that. But we have to support, what Joe Biden is doing and what the Democrats in Congress are doing to hold on to that majority and make sure that the January 6th crowd doesn't come creeping back into power. And that's a tall order. We have a very, very diverse group of folks supporting Democrats, and certainly racially and ethnically, but also policy-wise. How should we handle Ukraine? How should we handle Russia, China? I was a strong supporter of the Build Back Better plan that we weren't able to get passed in the Senate. But within that diversity, we have to find enough unity to be effective this year when it comes to the campaigns, because we all know what the alternative is. Now, part of getting that done is to work to make sure that we do better. If there's things that we aren't doing, issues we aren't addressing, let's talk about it and figure out how to address them. But we got to work together as we head towards November. So thank you. I appreciate the time. I leave it up to the chair if anyone had a question they wanted to ask. I know you've got a busy agenda, but I'm happy to answer if you have them.
Yeah, there's a couple of questions that I put in the chat. I don't know if you can see that, but one was why were new highway lanes included in funding when we are in a climate crisis?
Well, that couple aspects of the infrastructure bill. There was actually quite a bit of money in there also for public transportation and also energy infrastructure. We have to transition off of fossil fuels. But to transition off of fossil fuels, we have to invest in an alternative. Fossil fuels have a 150-year head start on us in terms of infrastructure. So the charging stations that are in that bill, the support for battery technology, the support for getting us towards electric vehicles and off of fossil fuels is crucially important. But in the short term, we also need people to get around. The West Seattle Bridge is out. There's no, at the moment, public transportation solution to that. It's got to be rebuilt. The bridge down in Vancouver, going into Oregon, is increasingly congested and backed up. So roads continue to be part of it. But what I like about this bill, and what I like better about the Build Back Better plan, which we need to continue to work on, which had $500 and some odd billion for climate resilience and for dealing with those issues, is we've got to build that energy future going forward. And I think we've taken some steps. We got a lot longer to go to get us off of fossil fuels.
And then the last question here is, please thank Rep. Smith for great work on addressing local issues and his caution about the war. This person would like to hear even more about help for Ukraine. What about humanitarian corridors? Yeah,
there's a lot of humanitarian corridors. Obviously, those humanitarian corridors are under some pressure from the Russians, but everything that I'm briefed on, and I'm briefed at a pretty high level, is still getting in. Humanitarian aid is getting in. It's not getting in everywhere. We've seen the scenes from Mariupol, for instance, but it is getting in. And my advice is the Red Cross is a great place to work, is a great group to work with in terms of if you want to make a donation, work through the Red Cross. They know how to get the humanitarian aid to the people who need it. There was another organization. I had the same conversation last night. Somebody mentioned a different organization that I'm now spacing on. But like I said, I think the Red Cross is a group. Work with a trusted partner. Because a lot of people are saying they're going to help. It can be confusing and chaotic. We have a lot of groups out there that have vast experience in this area. Red Cross is the one that encouraged me. If you've got aid, get it to them, and they can get humanitarian aid into the Ukrainian people. And also, as you know, humanitarian aid for the refugees. It's well over 2 million Ukrainians now who have fled Ukraine into Poland and Romania, into Hungary. Also, by the way, I read an article today, there's a fair number of Russians who are fleeing Russia because of the repression that Putin is bringing down. So we're going to have Russian refugees as well. So support for the people in Ukraine and also support for the refugees is crucial.
Okay. And I will, I'll put Arshia's contact information here in the chat if people want to reach out and ask more questions or get involved with you more.
Terrific. Thank you very much. I appreciate the chance.
All right. Thank you very much. And have a good evening since it's so late there.
You as well.
Okay, moving on. King County Prosecutor Lisa, are you? Oh, there you are. I can see you.
Yes,
All right.
thank you. Hello, Mr. Chair, and thank you everyone in the 43rd. It's really nice to be here with you this evening. So I am running for King County Prosecuting Attorney. For the past 15 years, I have served as the Chief of Staff for the King County Prosecuting Attorney's Office. And in this role, I oversee a workforce of nearly 600 employees and an annual budget of $80 million. In this role, I have also worked to build important and effective strategies to improve public safety, to enhance victim services, and to reduce racial disproportionality. I'm especially proud of my work in being a co-founding partner of the Choose 180 program, which is a pre-filing juvenile diversion program designed to keep kids out of the court system and into the community where they have the opportunity and the skills and the mentors necessary to make different choices. I view that work as a catalyst to all of the other really fantastic juvenile reforms that we've made that have actually driven down juvenile crime. Juvenile crime is at an all-time low. Our referrals are at an all-time low, and it's an indicator that these programs are working. And it's this type of work that has earned me the endorsements of other civic leaders who care about equity just like I do, folks like Nate Miles and Martha Cho and Judy and Mark Mailing. I'm also currently working with the Seattle Chamber of Commerce, the Downtown Seattle Association, and the Seattle City Attorney's Office to address organized retail crime and to improve public safety in the downtown core and all parts of Seattle. And it is this type of work that has earned me the endorsement of important business leaders like John Bridge and Aaron Goodman with the Soto BIA. And I have the ability and the perspective to address not only the impact of crime, but also to get to the root cause of crime. And it's this type of work that I do and the experience that I have that has earned me the support of law enforcement and treatment providers alike. I am proud to have the support of former Police Chief Carmen Best, former Police Chief Jim Pugel, former King County Sheriff Sue Rohr, Lisa Dugard, the founder of LEAD, and Steve Woolworth, who is the CEO of Evergreen Treatment Services. And it's my proven leadership, my deep level of experience, my commitment to justice and safe communities in all parts of King County that have earned me the endorsement of important leaders such as King County Executive Dow Constantine, former Governor Gary Locke, U.S. Congresswoman Marilyn Strickland, Bellevue Mayor Lynn Robinson, King County Council members Claudia Balducci and Sarah Perry, former King County Council member Larry Gossett, Supreme Court Justice Bobby Bridge, Representative Jamila Taylor, and Senator Patty Curter, among others. And finally, because it is March and it's Women's History Month, I just want to say if elected, I would be the first woman and the first person of color to hold the seat. Thank you very much, and I look forward to earning your endorsement.
Thank you. Next up, we have Kat McDowell.
Good evening. Thank you. And my name is Kat McDowell. I am very grateful for the opportunity to introduce myself to you and let you know a little bit about what we've been working on at Seattle Municipal Court. By way of background for myself, I grew up in Ohio in a suburb of Cleveland. I went to law school on the East Coast in Virginia, and it was there that I met my husband, John Mcdowell, who is a lifelong Seattle resident. I've lived in Seattle since 1997, and we have 4 children, 2 girls, 19 and 17, and 2 boys, 15 and 12. By way of legal background, when I first graduated law school, I was in private practice in a large law firm in DC in civil litigation. But when I moved to Seattle, I chose to enter public service, and I got a job with the King County Prosecutor's Office. My experience there was really life-changing and formative, and my 11 years at the Prosecutor's Office cemented my commitment to public service. I retired from the Prosecutor's Office after 11 years, after the birth of our 4th child, to focus on family, but I continued my public service during that time through charity and community involvement. When I decided to return to the law, I chose again to enter public service and gained experience as a pro tem judge. I was appointed to the Seattle Municipal Court bench in October of 2020, which was a very interesting and exciting time to join the bench. Between the pandemic and calls for social change, there is a lot of momentum and enthusiasm at the court to revisit the way that the court does business and to enact meaningful change. And I feel very privileged to be part of this change. So a few things I've been working on. I know there's some of my colleagues are here too that will tell you what they've been working on, but I have been head of the remote access work group, which has worked to simplify and streamline our court forms and procedures and adapt them to our new virtual courtroom. I've led an effort to remove questions from our juror questionnaire in order to reduce the impact of implicit bias in jury selection. And I also wrote a position paper to persuade my colleagues that we have the legal authority to waive most legal fines and fees for defendants, even when they technically do not qualify as indigent. So that's a little bit about what I've been working on.
Judge McDowell, you muted yourself.
I think you muted yourself.
Sorry. Thank you. I was trying to put my contact information in the chat. Thank you very much for the opportunity to introduce myself to you. I really appreciate it.
Thank you very much. All right, up next, Faye Chess.
Okay, let me unmute myself. Thank you, everyone. I am so happy to be here. I was here, about 4 years ago. And when I first got to, when I presented to you the last time, I was in transition. I had been appointed by the mayor and I was trying to retain my seat. I was essentially homeless. I had lost my home to fire and I was trying to rebuild. And so now 4 years later, a lot has happened. The pandemic happened and things happened with the court. And although I was back in my house, it didn't mean I could relax, nor could my colleagues. In the 4 years since I've been on the bench, we brought back community court. We have the consolidated calendar. We have mental health, and we always had mental health court, but we made sure that was still running. We have veterans court, and we decided, in light of all the things happening, that we would still move forward to make our court the most equitable court anywhere, not just in the state of Washington, but anywhere. We wanted to make sure that we were judges who heard individuals when they came in, whether it was for a parking ticket or whether it was for their criminal case. Recently, as the judicial sponsor, we have brought a new calendar in, which is debt reduction. It means that people who have had cases, their tickets go to collection years ago, can get those tickets pulled out of collection, because those hardships stay with you. As some people know, when things go to collection, it's a heavy burden to carry. So a little bit about me. I tell people I have a eclectic background. I started out as a public defender. I have worked as an attorney for Seattle School District, Tukwila School District. Not only have I worked there as an attorney, I worked at Seattle Housing Authority. And then I was a HR professional for 3 local healthcare organizations. I have a broad background. And I think that's what the mayor looked at when she appointed me. I am somebody who can see, who has touched everything that impacts people on a daily basis. I have been fortunate. As I said, I got back in my home. I have 2 wonderful children. And I said, for what has been given to me, much is asked. So I have continued to reach out in the community. I was appointed by the governor to the Oversight Committee for Legal Aid. I've also am a member of the Minority Justice Commission. I have to say I have a proud moment because I recently was the co-chair of the publication of the Judges of Color. Since that publication was published last in 2017, and there have been many gains made with minority judges being elected or appointed in this state. We still got work to do, but it's so much more different. And I'm so glad I had an opportunity to work on that. I am part of the leadership at the court. And so as I tell people, people need a person with my background and who looks like me. I will work tirelessly, as I've always have through my entire career as a public servant, to make sure that people are heard, they have access, and they are treated equitably. And so I hope that I can get your support this year as I look to retain my position, number 6 in Seattle Municipal Court. And I think you'll hear a little bit more about what the fabulous things that Seattle Municipal Court is doing from another colleague who's here. I put my contact, some information, so you can find out a lot about me. I tell people, Google me, and you'll get to know all the things I've been working on in the last 4 years since I've been at the bench. Thank you very much, and I appreciate your time.
Thank you, Judge Chess. And we have one more, Judge Damon Shadid.
Yes. Thank you all so much for having us here today. I'm running for Seattle Municipal Court Position 7. This would be my 3rd term, and I am seeking your endorsement at the 43rd. You know, I think there's a tendency among a lot of people to treat elected officials, and especially as judges, as this sort of inhuman type person up there who doesn't have emotion or doesn't feel. And that couldn't be further from the truth. Judges are out there every day. And by the nature of our work, we deal with people one-on-one every single day. And we see their problems come into our court. We see their barriers, and we see their trauma. And it's up to us to go in there and figure out how we're going to make that better. Because we have to do 2 things at the court, especially municipal court. We have to first make sure that our community is safe. But second, we have to make sure that the people who are the most impacted in the criminal legal system are protected. And this is what I've tried to do. I've tried to find different ways that the criminal legal system can work for both the community and for defendants who come into it. And to that end, I've been working hard. My colleagues gave me the authority to negotiate a new community court, which is probably the most progressive community court in the entire state. I'd be happy to talk to you about it, but we are absolutely having huge success in connecting people to services and getting their cases dismissed instead of going with a punitive approach that gives them convictions and makes it harder for them to get services and work. I've also had to revamp the mental health court completely. I've been presiding over the mental health court for over 2 years now, building it from the ground up, trying to really help this extremely vulnerable, but sometimes dangerous community as well. And to see what we can do with True Blood funds and with getting out of our silos and working with community partners to help. Finally, I've also built from the ground up a consolidated calendar that Judge Chess also mentioned. That's where we work with community partners like LEAD, Vital, and REACH, people who have caseworkers in the community. And what we've created is a single one-stop shop for all of those case managers to be able to come to court on a single day and to help their clients on a single day and to work hand in glove with the criminal legal system, but not under my auspices, totally independent for me, but able to advocate for their clients at the same time. I'm really proud of this work, but there's a lot more work to be done. And I would be honored to have your support for a 3rd term. Again, Damon Shadid, I am running for position 7. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Judge Shadid. All right. Annabelle, are we free to start the meeting officially now?
If we have quorum,
I believe we do.
it looks like we do.
Okay. So let me reshare. Okay, here we go, back up. So approval of the agenda and February meeting minutes. Any objections to approving the agenda and the February meeting minutes? One more time, any objections? All right, they will be approved. Thank you very much. And we will hop back to our regular programming here. Next up, we have an update from our 43rd representative, Senator Peterson, Representative Chop, Representative Macri, on the just completed illustrious 2022 legislative session. Camille, do you want to take this away?
Yeah, happy to. Thank you three for being here. The policy committee did prepare some questions for you all to kind of start us off. We have, I believe, 5 questions, and then I'm happy to have you all, give updates through those questions, and then have other folks in the membership ask questions as well. I'm just going to ask the questions, and then you all can kind of decide who's best to answer. But starting off with a question about House Bill 1099. So that one that just happened, in the last day or so. Why did the House fail to bring 1099 to a vote despite all of the momentum and progress behind it throughout the session? And who would you say is responsible for making or not letting this happen?
I'm glad to take that one. Thanks for that, Camille. Hi, everyone. Nicole Macri. And that was a really painful loss on last Thursday as the run up to Sine Die, the end of session. 1099 is a bill that requires that local communities take into account climate change when they do their comprehensive planning as part of the Growth Management Act. And we have been working on that bill for quite a while. 1099 was introduced actually last year, but there had been work to incorporate consideration for climate change into GMA comp planning for many years preceding the introduction of 1099. 1099 was one of the first bills that the House passed over to the Senate, actually, on January 21st. I know that because it was a bill that was really important to me. And there was some volleying back and forth with that bill towards the end of session because of some amendments that were put on it in the Senate. It came back to us on the last day of session in the House. Required a scope and object ruling by both the Lieutenant Governor and the Speaker's attorney. Got a favorable ruling from the Lieutenant Governor, and we had hoped and expected to concur with the conference report that was agreed to in a conference committee between House and Senate. Due to timing mostly, and the fact that the circumstances led to 1099 coming back to the House so late, the bill did not make it to the floor. It was actually quite painful for me because the budget, which I worked on very, very intensely over the whole course of the session, was one of the factors that led to the demise of 1099. That there was strategically a very long debate on the budget put forth by Republicans. I believe all 41 members of the Republican caucus spoke on the budget to extend that debate to over 2 hours. And so that was one of the reasons. But I'll say that I was part of an effort to try to get 1099 to the floor, as part of an effort to try to figure out every which way we could keep 1099 alive, but it failed. We failed to get it to the floor. We failed to, and that had to do with the timing. The session ended at midnight, and there just wasn't enough time to bring it forward. I know there was a lot of behind the scenes work between House and Senate leadership to try to keep that bill alive. And so that's the kind of painful loss that we often see in a short session. And it is particularly painful given the timing of it, because some of the biggest community comp plans in the largest counties in the state are going to be underway, and bringing that bill forward at a later time won't have the same effect. But we're not unaccustomed to such painful losses, but I'll just say it wasn't just one factor, and there's just not one person to point to, but you could see it was a challenging bill in every step of the way to keep alive for a variety of different reasons. And as always, the number one way that we lift up these kinds of policies is through organizing and making sure that the entire legislature sees climate action as an imperative and not just some of us who've been working on policies. I think all three of us have supported that policy, and that one was a particularly painful one. It was we had a lot of good wins on Thursday, but it was difficult for me to sort of not be very focused on that particular loss on that particular evening.
Camille, can I answer that as well? Yeah. First of all, thanks, Camille, for asking the questions tonight and for your efforts here. I also want to thank Arvia Morris, who I think is on the call here tonight. She kept us up to date on the various versions of it. I was actually one of the original co-sponsors of the bill, so I felt very strongly about the issue from the get-go. And we passed it, as Nicole said, from the House. When it came back from the Senate, it was significantly weakened, but then it got changed. And so along the way, Arvia kept us posted. I really want to thank her for her diligence in terms of that. So we just got to recommit to going forward next session to get the thing done for the future.
Go ahead, Senator Peterson.
Oh, thank you. So Jamie Peterson, State Senator. So in the Senate, we did go, as Nicole mentioned, we had a procedural challenge about the conference report, which I think everybody supported in the end, everybody on our side, that is. And I got to, as the floor leader, I got to make the argument to the Lieutenant Governor that the amendment was within scope, and he, we sent him off. He was gone for a couple hours, and I think really agonized over that ruling, but ultimately ruled with us. And then the Senate passed the conference report. So as Nicole said, I think in the end, the sort of cause was a difference between the House and the Senate on a separate bill about higher education and creating a state student loan program. And the House didn't start debating the budget until they were sure that the Senate was going to pass that other bill. So that's how we got sort of twisted around the axle at the end. But I think we did have a form of the bill that was broadly supported by the end of session.
Thank you, all three of you, for providing a bit of insight into that really huge disappointment that a lot of people were experiencing on Thursday and still are. Will, did you have a follow-up to that particular issue?
Yes, that particular issue. So we're aware that you're having problems getting things through. One of the major questions we've had is, why is the state still funding new state highway lanes, even though we know they increase global warming emissions and we know they do not reduce congestion? Thank you.
That's another good question, Will, and one that I asked multiple times. And I think, as I think you're aware, to put together transportation budgets and the Move Ahead Washington transportation package is really delicate work to negotiate packages that will get the votes, a majority of the votes. And I think that's just the plain and simple reason for that. I really agonized back and forth about voting for the transportation package for the reasons that you state. I did vote for it, and that it was in part because it had broad support from climate champions, because of just how progressive and green the package is. So it is the best package we have ever seen in the history of the state. But as you point out, it's not perfect. And there was much debate too about what is repair and maintenance and what is expansion. And I really pushed our caucus leaders in transportation on that question because we definitely need to be looking at all alternatives to highway expansion. One small thing in the transportation package, I was glad that we finally got in our 2030 goal for 100% zero emission vehicles. I had been working on that with folks from the 43rd for the last 3 or 4 years. So that was just a small piece that I was directly involved in, and just an indication. And there was huge opposition from Republicans on that one little small piece. It took up about an hour of floor debate, their opposition and wanting to peel that out of the package. So just gives you an indication of how far we are from where we need to be, but we continue to push forward. And the backing that we have from this district is really, really helpful for us to raise a lot of questions and scrutiny on the investments that we're making across the state.
Senator Peterson, go ahead.
Thank you. So I agree with everything that Nicole said. I guess I just want to add, I mean, I think people know this, but we are going into an absolutely perilous year for Democrats, and it is not at all out of the question that we could lose the House this fall. It's less likely, given the seats that are up, that we could lose the Senate, but not out of the question. I mean, you can sort of chart the path. Wearing my chair of the Senate Democratic campaign hat, I will tell you that getting a transportation package done is probably one of the most important positive things that we believe we could do to help the prospects for retaining control of the legislature. And so, you know, I viewed our job as advocating for the greenest, most transit and multimodal friendly package that we could possibly have. And we were enormously benefited in that way by our work last year to pass the Climate Commitment Act, which provided, you know, roughly $4.5–5 billion of flexible funding that we didn't have to spend on roads, right? This is a package that is not at all made up of gas tax revenues, which are constitutionally required to be spent on roads. So unlike any of the previous transportation packages that I have witnessed in the legislature, this one was really much greener and more balanced. And, you know, I think it is the pushing that we had from the 43rd and that other Seattle legislators had that made that a requirement for getting a majority to support the package.
Thank you. Yeah, so that actually brings me to my next question from the policy committee. So you mentioned how the Dems are at a lot of risk of losing the majority this year. And so that is, you know, very true. But one of the questions that we had is, if the Dems are at risk of losing the majority, then how come they let so many things slide during the session, including the backsliding of a ton of the police accountability bills that were passed in 2021?
So let me start on that one. I guess I'm going to take very quick and dramatic issue with the premise of that question. In 2021, we passed, depending on how you count, between 12 and 14 major police accountability bills. And I think by many measures, that was the strongest set of bills passed by any legislature in the country. Two of those bills, House Bill 1054, which was about police tactics, and House Bill 1310, were sort of the focus of police complaints over the interim and a lot of media attention. We developed two bills in collaboration between the House and the Senate that were broadly agreed, including by the Coalition for Police Accountability. And those are 1710 and 1735, which passed with broad agreement and, you know, I think are are going to be signed by the governor. Those are clarifying issues, for example, saying that police can use force when they're putting somebody into involuntary treatment. So there were a lot of bills that never got hearings that I think everybody on this call would count as backsliding. There were two bills that were active during the session, House Bill 2037 and Senate Bill 5919. House Bill 2037 made changes to use of force, and that passed with large bipartisan majorities, notwithstanding the fact that Frank Nicole and I all voted against it. I think we were close. I got some language in the Law and Justice Committee that shifted the coalition to be neutral on the bill, but that got stripped off on the Senate floor, and we did not have a majority that wanted to stick with the previous language on use of force. The other bill, 5919, had to do with vehicular pursuits, hot pursuits by police. And, that one passed, Frank and Nicole, I don't know what it was, 85 votes or something like that out of the House, unfortunately, undoing some of the reforms that we did last year on pursuits. The Senate Democrats held together. 20 of the 28 of us were opposed to that bill, and 26 of the 28 of us held together on all the procedural votes. And we had attack after attack after attack on the last day trying to bring that bill to the floor, and we rejected those and did not pass that bill. It died on the concurrence calendar on the last day in the Senate. So really it is just the tweaking of use of force that is the only thing that passed that the coalition did not agree with. And we were able to preserve nearly all of the good work that we did in 2021. So I just can't agree with the characterization of massive backsliding by the legislature. Thank you.
And if I can just add, I think, Jamie, you're sort of underplaying the enormous role you played in preventing 5919 from coming to the floor in the Senate. And I'm just grateful that we didn't see that bill pass into law. As floor leader, I know that you played a really key role in that. So thank you for that.
Okay, thank you. Paul, how are we doing on time?
We got probably about 10 minutes, maybe a little more. So.
Okay, cool. Awesome. So the next question is regarding the wealth tax. So this is something that it has been one of the top priorities of our organization for the last couple of years, and we are very interested in implementing progressive taxation and revenue as a district. And so we're curious what each of your stances is on the wealth tax and what it is going to take in order to pass it at the state level.
Oh, I could probably start on that, Camille, if that's okay. I was a sponsor of the wealth tax in the House. I think it's very important to have progressive revenue. The key, though, is to have a smart strategy about how to get it done. And we did that for the child care program last year, the Fair Start for Kids Act. And we funded those investments, $500 million a year of new investments for child care early learning with a capital gains tax. But it was done in this strategy. The first thing you talk about is the investment. What are we raising money for? Because the public statewide are going to focus in on what are the needs of the people around the state. They don't start with taxes, they start with investments. And so that investment went quite well, and we passed the capital gains tax, and the same philosophy goes for the wealth tax. I feel very strongly that we need to identify a core group of investments. And my suggestion, which I think Nicole knows about, and I've already started writing up a outline of new legislation, it would be investments in people with disabilities. We have major funding needs in our public schools for special education. We have over 15,000 people who are eligible for community services who are developmentally disabled. And we got a long list of other people who fit the definition of having disabilities, including 70% of the folks who are chronically homeless are there because of their medical condition, mental illness, substance use disorder, which can be defined obviously as a disability. So I'm working up and I'll be starting a stakeholder process fairly soon to involve a lot of people and figuring out what the investments are. The second part of it is it needs to go into a dedicated fund. If you just say the money goes in the state general fund, I'm sorry, but the public doesn't trust the legislature in terms of that. I see Will shaking his head. Yeah, he's probably one of the ones that don't trust us, anyway. But the point is that they don't trust us. They want to know what the money's going to, and they want to make sure it's in a dedicated fund, which is what we did again with the, child care program. We put it into the Educational Legacy Trust Fund that I started years ago with the estate tax, and along the same philosophy. So that's what we need is a 1, 2, 3 approach: investments, dedicated fund, and then the revenue, which needs to be broad-based and progressive. And by broad-based, I don't mean all the people pay it. Actually, a relatively small number would pay it, but it would be broad-based in support that people would see the need for it because of why we need the investments. They don't want to just raise taxes just to raise taxes across the state. But this is the winning strategy, and I think we have a real shot at doing it. But as Jamie said, there are some real dangers coming up this year. There's a real possibility that the capital gains tax there'll be an initiative to repeal it. But because we followed that philosophy, 1, 2, 3, the percentage of public support for it went up by 11 percentage points. That is, the people will vote it down to repeal it. That's a critical one. Then also there's the long-term care trust that Nicole and I have been working on quite a bit. And we did a strategic pause of the program in order to save it, but that may be also on the ballot. So we have to pay attention not only to the Democratic majorities, as Jamie said, but in terms of these key issues that are extremely progressive, the best of the nation, the first of the nation. So that's what we got to focus in on. Thank you.
I'll have Senator Peterson go, and then Will, you can ask your follow-up.
Yeah, thank you. So I guess I just wanted to piggyback on what Frank said to say that we're not sitting idle about the challenge to capital gains. We actually passed a bill this year that will require that the ballot says what would be cut, the top 3 things that would be cut, like right on the ballot in big letters next to the initiative to repeal capital gains, so that people will understand the consequences for early learning. I guess the other thing that I want to say, just relative to the wealth tax, I think that our primary strategy for 10 years has been getting capital gains through, and we've been working very methodically on, getting back to simple majority for approval of taxes, and then finally to that monumental vote last year to get the capital gains tax passed. I'm open to the wealth tax, although I think we got to acknowledge that we are a long way. That bill has not had the support to get out of the House Finance Committee, let alone out of the Senate. I think one of the keys to make it would be to make it work by broadening the group to which it applies and shrinking the percentage tax. So maybe it's people who have more than $10 million who ought to pay a 0.1% tax, which I'm guessing might actually raise more money. But I think this is the same process that we went through with the capital gains tax. From the initial soundbite and sort of talking about it, you actually have to go through and do the work with revenue back and forth of how we can implement it in a way that raises money that we can then use either to lower regressive taxes or, as Frank suggested, to invest in things like special ed that are chronically underfunded.
Thank you. Yeah, I'll have Representative Macri give her answer and then go for the member questions.
Yeah, thanks for that, Camille. And I agree, not surprisingly, with what Frank and Jamie have said. And I think Frank lays out kind of the tried and true method for how we can pass new progressive revenue. I will say, you know, the risks in the 2022 election cycle are like ones that I certainly have never experienced in my political career, and I safe to say probably not Jamie either. But
2010. 2010.
Oh, 2010 maybe in the
but only Frank of us saw 1994.
Yes, Obama midterm. As Frank reminds us, he's the only member of the delegation who's actually served in the minority, and really understands what that. Oh,
I served in the minority for 4 years.
House.
Thank you.
True. Yeah, very true, Jamie. And the risks of that are real. And so I will say that the work that's been done with the tax structure work group, I want to just lift that up. And sorry, you started talking about taxes, so I think you got us all kind of like excited. The tax structure work group has done a lot of work in getting input from across the state. And we do think there's actually really a path for potential tax reform, and probably more likely starting with business tax reform, because there actually is Republican support for some business tax reform. And I do want to highlight that in this year, as part of our budget package, we actually passed some business and occupation tax reform to extend exemptions for our smallest businesses in the state, and which is great. And I'm hoping that that is just a preview of continued reform work that we need to do. So I'm a strong supporter of the wealth tax. It is hugely popular with voters. And I think, as Frank suggests, tying it to the expenditures and starting first with what are the things that people want us to invest in is going to be the way to go. But as Jamie says, you also have to tweak the tax policy to make sure that you get that broad support from the public in order to get the votes in the legislature. So I think there'll be continued conversation. I was glad to see the Senate held a hearing on the wealth tax bill this year, so that there's just more kind of thinking and contemplation about, you know, the specifics around the policy. And there was never, as far as what I could tell, there was never any expectation that in a short session that we would pass the wealth tax, but all of this is a runway potentially for conversation in the next biennium.
Right. Go ahead, Will, and then Annabelle, and then Linda.
Yes, so I believe that if we do nothing, and it doesn't matter what our reasons are, that an initiative to the people will be filed to impose a wealth tax on millionaires. Now, it's up to you if you want to guide that towards capital gains tax outside of retirement plans. You have a good chance of guiding it. But if you do nothing, it will be filed, and it will probably totally mess with all of your tax structures. I mean, taxing businesses is never going to be popular. Taxing people who are already getting $1 million every year is popular, and there's no way to change that. You have to do something, and we're not going to accept, oh, it was difficult this year. Thank you.
Go ahead, Annabelle.
Hi. Yeah, wanted to ask about this in a slightly different direction. The framing here has been around progressive revenue as new revenue. And I think that the strategy that Representative Chop in particular put forward around focusing on what are you funding, that certainly makes a lot of sense when you're talking about new revenue sources. That's not the problem, though, right? The problem is that we have an entire state budget built out of the most regressive tax sources that we could come up with. And just piling progressive tax revenue sources on top of that is really just burying people deeper in the hole. So what is the strategy to not just adopt new forms of revenue generation, but to replace what we have with progressive sources. Like, how do we spin that? How do we get people to recognize the value and the importance of that and how it is going to benefit them?
Camille, do you want me to take a run at that question?
Yes, please.
Okay, thanks, Paul. So look, I'll just expand a little bit on what I was saying before. So Washington lived for 20 years under this series of initiatives that required 2/3 majorities in the legislature to raise taxes. And that just put us in a position where the legislature could, with a simple majority, enact a tax break that was then there forever, because we couldn't undo it without a 2/3 majority in both chambers, which, it's been many years since the Democrats have had 2/3 majorities. So then Speaker Chop and Representative Jenkins and Representative Fraucht and I organized a lawsuit. And the first step in that strategy that you're talking about, Annabelle, was to get rid of those initiatives by Tim Eyman that will allow the legislature to do this work with a simple majority. And we have been enormously benefited over the last 10 years by the fact that the legislature can, with simple majority, make tax policy. The next step was to do the capital gains tax, which is important. I mean, it's not an insignificant amount of money, but the importance, in my opinion, is less about the dollars that it's raising and more about the fact that the opponents are attacking it as an income tax. And that gives us a clean shot to go back to the Supreme Court and go back to the root of this entire problem. Up until 1932, the only revenue source for our state was property tax. And the Grange sponsored, of all organizations, sponsored an initiative to impose an income tax in the state. That income tax was overturned by the state Supreme Court, which said, well, income is a form of property. And so you're limited by the 1% cap on tax, and you're limited by the uniformity clause. You have to apply the same percentage rate across all kinds of property. So, out of that disaster in terms of the budget during the Depression, the legislature created the B&O tax and the sales tax, which are most of the state revenue. So if we're going to blow that up and come up with a more balanced system, we're jealous of Idaho in this regard. Then the key to that is that we've got to figure out how to have an income tax in our state, and getting the state Supreme Court to say, you are free, legislature, to do an income tax or a capital gains tax or a wealth tax, any of these things with a simple majority is what we've been working on. And I am hopeful that that's where we're going to get with the Supreme Court. But that is the core problem that we are looking at. I was very supportive of 5980, which is the bill that Nicole mentioned that changes the B&O tax and takes a large majority by number of our state's businesses out from even having to pay any B&O tax at all, a lot of small businesses. And I think that is the kind of popular tax reform that we're going to have to do to capture the imagination of people in the state and create real momentum for something that, frankly, Democrats have been talking about for decades, wanting to do.
Is there a timeline for getting this before the Supreme Court? Do we expect that to happen?
We had a decision out of a trial court in Eastern Washington in Douglas County, I think. Nobody expects that to be the final word. I think probably, who knows how quickly they'll do it. I assume that they may take direct review, and I'm hopeful that within, say, the next year, we'll have a final decision from the Supreme Court. But, I've been wrong before about how long they would take or what they would decide.
If we get that ruling the way we hope we do, should we expect to see an income tax proposal from Democrats, assuming we still control anything in the
I think that
legislature
is
at
the
that
key.
point?
That's the key question, right? Who's in
Right.
control of the
But
legislature?
if we assume that is the case, is that something we should expect to see the Democrats put forward in coming sessions?
I think there would be a lot of work to do that in a way that would not create a giant, that would not create a Republican legislature, right? But I do think absolutely that as soon as we have that ability, then there will be really significant work done to figure out how we could do a broad and comprehensive redo of our tax system. And that's one of the things that I feel most strongly about in terms of the remaining time, whatever that is that I have in the legislature, working on those issues.
Thank you for indulging my follow-ups.
All right, let's see. I think I'll jump in here and finish off the questions. I think Camille had to jump for something else. So thank you, Camille, for the questions. And I will finish out this last one. Paul, does that work in terms of timing?
I'm unmuted. Let's let Linda and Manny ask theirs and close out with those two.
Yeah, sorry, thank you.
Linda?
Thank you. First of all, thank you for all the three of you are doing. It's really amazing what you are accomplishing. My question really is a follow-up on what we've been talking about, which is, we know that our tax system not only is regressive and unfair, we also know that it increasingly falls behind need, structurally falls behind the needs of an increasing population. And so what I really want to know is what your grand strategy is for incrementally getting toward a much fairer system. I really like what Frank's saying about talk about the investments instead of the tax you're going to create. But we invest less every year structurally. So what's your approach to the picture you want to see as opposed to the picture we have right now?
Nicole or Frank, do you want to start on that one? I mean, I guess, Linda, one thing I do want to push back on a little bit, I remember these numbers vividly because, at the time that the Great Recession started, we had to, do dramatic cuts in our budget. At that point, the state's biennial budget was about $30 billion. And now 10 years later, it's over $60 billion. I don't want to dispute at all the need for doing tax reform and changing the revenue sources, but I think one of the things that we have seen here in the last, in the last year and a half of the pandemic is that we've actually got sort of a robust, in some ways almost runaway tax system that is producing a lot of revenue right now. Now, it isn't the way that we want the revenue to be raised, but our budget is 60. What now, Nicole? Is it 64 billion?
64.
64
the operating
billion.
budget. Yeah, and we
$4 billion.
transferred close to
So,
$3 billion. Yeah, to capital and transport. Yeah.
So it isn't again, I don't want to say there aren't any problems, and we clearly have a lot of work to do, but it is not the same structural problem that they have, for example, at the county, where the county is in this noose with the 1% increase in property tax and being primarily dependent on property tax for revenue. We have a lot of revenue, but it's coming in unfair ways, and we need to change that. But we have had resources, and then we have voted for increased taxes to make really dramatic additional investments in public education, in higher education, in early learning, in K-12. So a whole series of things that we have been able to do.
But isn't part of that the money that's coming from the feds because of pandemic relief?
A small part of it. Yeah, about half of the additional revenue that we had this year was one-time revenue. So a piece of it from the federal relief but some of it was due to increased just forecasts on the revenue coming to the state. And part of that is, because of how the tax code is structured, we know that sales tax revenues have been up because people have been home buying things instead of out using services. That 3 years ago, we were talking about why that was a really big problem, because people are buying fewer things and using more services. And it was it was an unexpected twist with the pandemic. But there was huge pressure for us to put back revenue through broad tax cuts that would have benefited Washingtonians more broadly. And instead, we as Democrats chose to make strategic investments in those Washingtonians, families and communities who were struggling the most through the pandemic. That includes, as Jamie said, early learning, K-12, but it also includes a lot of our social programs, increases in TANF and age-blind disabled, huge increases in behavioral health and housing and homelessness response. And that would not have been possible, of course, if we would have done the broad kind of tax cuts that, especially from Republicans, but not exclusively from Republicans, that we were getting pressure to do.
But what you're also saying is if we go back to our former living habits, more services and fewer things, we're back in a revenue problem.
Exactly. We need to diversify the tax code. We've long known that. And I think that's what Jamie was talking about, sort of what's the pathway to get there. And I think he honed in on something similar to what I said, which is the business tax reform, I think is likely the first step to that. And building the campaign for an income tax, that we've been working on for the past many years. The passing capital gains is part of that. Seeing how the court rules on capital gains is a key element of that. But there are many pieces, many steps in the path towards comprehensive tax reform. But we are fortunate that we have many folks in the legislature who are very much focused on that path and doing it in a very strategic way.
Thank you.
Hi, thanks again for talking with us. My question is about the missing middle bills that came forward in the last session. So Washington is tens of thousands of homes behind our population growth. So I'm wondering what went wrong that caused modest bills to allow homes like fourplexes and ADUs to fail in the last session, and what should we expect in the future from the state to help ameliorate our shortfall of lower cost housing?
I'm glad to start on that one. I worked real hard on that missing middle bill, and it never actually went to the Senate. So I don't think they had as much conversation in the Senate as we did in the House about it. I was disappointed that we didn't get the bill further along, but I'll say we did build tremendous momentum on that policy, and we're able to have conversations among Democrats that we have not previously been able to have about the role of supply side policy like the missing middle bill, and sort of just the nuances of that, where the role of the state and where the role of the locals sort of begin and end when it comes to zoning policy. We got the bill out of appropriations. It was pulled out of rules. It just did not have the votes to come to the floor, which was disappointing. And I think it is, in some ways, it's a technical issue. And so a bill in a short session, when we have such short floor time, when there are highly technical issues, can kind of run away from us in terms of getting the votes. So I think that was potentially one issue. We were able to get into the budget just an acknowledgement of the fact that the largest counties in the state, King, Pierce, Snohomish, Kitsap, are all going to be doing their 10-year comprehensive plan updates for 2024. We were able to get some significant resources in the budget to incentivize local communities to build more middle housing, to diversify housing in what has traditionally been single family zones. And so I think all is not lost, but I'm hopeful that that kind of a policy will come back. And this has been a big struggle for Democrats across the country. And the organizing around that bill has, I think, been really, really tremendous. And I'm hopeful that we can bring that kind of policy back next year. I think it's essential to address our housing crisis. It's not the only thing, but it is one essential piece for us to really push on.
I could add a little bit there. Nicole is absolutely right. She did a great amount of work to support that bill. I voted for it out of appropriations as well. But I also think that we need to think of it also in terms of the progressive nature or not progressive nature. There are 3 or 4 ideas that I would suggest that would make the proposal for middle housing much more progressive, which would require more affordable housing units, not just open up to the free market. So we should build on that notion of creating a lot more housing, but also make sure it's affordable and also dealing with social equity. There's some programs in the past, or not programs, but practices in the past that have been horrible for racial groups, particularly Black Americans. The restrictive covenants, which were endemic in the 43rd district, by the way, in the 46th and the 36th, et cetera, going back decades, basically shut out a huge number of people of color from owning a home and building their own equity. So we are working together with people like David Hackney and others, representative from the 11th district, to propose ways so you could sort of meld these ideas together, create a lot more housing, middle housing, but also more affordability and some specific funding sources to pay to make sure that particularly Black Americans can afford to get a house for the first time and reverse the decades of racial discrimination.
Cody? Oh, you back, Camille?
Yeah, sorry, I am back, but do we have time for one more?
Yeah, one more, and then let's let our representatives give a little bit of summary and sign off.
Okay. The last question that we had is about the bill that would have let your all staffers unionize. So the Democratic Party is supposed to be the pro-union party, and it seems like this time around both Democrats and Republicans were acting as union busters, and so we want to know how that happened and why the legislature didn't let the staff unionizing bill get very far.
We passed 2124, so we have created an office and funded an Office of State Labor Relations. We have removed the restriction that prevented legislative employees from organizing, and we have created a process that will allow them to form bargaining units and to bargain with us. So I think, again, I've just got to dispute the premise of the question, because the legislature has passed the legislation.
Yeah. I don't know what else to add. There were 2 different bills, 1806 and then 2124. Frank and I and others worked to get 1806 out of the Appropriations Committee. It didn't get to the floor in the House, but then 2024 was introduced with this kind of different model of establishing an Office of Labor Relations, which actually makes sense. And I'll say, there initially were some concerns about 2024 was it as progressive?
I think 21. I think it's
21, 24. Thank you. Sorry about that. Was it really as progressive as 1806? And what got me really on board with 21, 24, and that what is a slightly sort of longer timeline than the original bill had in it was based on my experience serving on the sexual harassment work group for the House of Representatives, where I got to work with a number of different work groups, not just House Democrats, but House Republicans and nonpartisan staff, and really came to understand that a lot of the issues that staff in the legislature face are pretty universal issues, and staff concerns are pretty equally shared, at least in the House of Representatives. And so establishing an Office of Labor Relations that will allow for some more time to engage all the work groups in the legislature, I actually think is probably in the long run going to be a more strategic way to proceed. So I'm actually feeling pretty hopeful about 21, 24. I know that many House Democratic staff, Senate Democratic staff are, I've heard, interested in organizing a bargaining unit, but that isn't universally shared among work groups. And I think the pathway that is set out in 21, 24 will I think hopefully result in a stronger outcome for those public servants who are employed in both the House and the Senate.
All right, thank you. I'm going to pass it then off to Paul to move forward.
All right. Representative Macri, Chop, Senator Peterson, any final comments?
I'm glad to give a few final comments. Just thank you for all this time. Thank you for the questions, which highlight really what are many of the priorities from our district that we really worked hard in this short session to push forward on. I worked pretty intensely this session on the House operating budget and the budget that the legislature eventually passed. And I think we have a lot to feel proud about in all of our budgets, the capital budget, the transportation budget, and in the House operating budget. I think given the circumstances that we're in, as we continue to see sort of the uneven impacts of the pandemic on Washington residents, that our ability to do strategic tax cuts and exemptions, not broad-based ones, and our ability to make those investments that I talked about earlier is really going to position our state not just for recovery, but I really believe for resilience in the long term. So that is something I'm really grateful for. And I mentioned all the sort of the big areas. The one other area I didn't mention is there significant investments in all three budgets, including in the operating budget on climate action. We were able to put together a package of over $600 million of investments and exemptions to rapidly transition us to a greener transportation system and to more solar energy usage across the state, which I think is just really another great thing. I just want to thank everyone from the 43rd who reached out during session. Frank mentioned Arvia and many others of you who reached out with really detailed input about the policies that we were considering, and that kind of timely and detailed input is really, really helpful to me as we're considering policies, and particularly in a short session where there's a high volume in a short amount of time. So very grateful for that. And as Jamie and Frank said, now we're turning our attention to the election season, and it's going to be a tough one. And we are really focused on retaining Democratic majorities in the House and the Senate. And that it's not a question as to whether or not Democrats will retain control in the 43rd legislative district, but it is a question in many other districts around the state. So I'm hopeful that we can work together to help folks across the state return to ensure that we can keep our Democratic majorities, because the difference is significant, is very, very significant when we do not have Democratic majorities in both the House and Senate. So looking forward to the coming months and working with you all as we turn our attention to the elections. Thank you.
If I could build on Nicole is being modest. She did an enormous amount of work in the operating budget for all sorts of progressive causes, including housing and homelessness. So really thanks for being a great partner there, Nicole. In part of that budget situation, I would just want to mention two things. One is the capital budget of the state invested nearly $500 million in affordable housing, including a whole bunch of housing in the 43rd district, by the way. A year ago, we allocated about $60 million of rapid acquisition money for supportive housing, and the first three projects were actually up on Capitol Hill with the Low Income Housing Institute. So we're doing things that benefit people across the state, but also right here in the 43rd district. The other one I must say, though, is I led the effort to create the Apple Health and Homes legislation. This is very significant. This is, I think, the first time in the nation that we link healthcare with housing, because 70% of the people who are chronically homeless, 70% are there because of their medical condition, mental illness, substance use disorder, or major physical disability. 70% of the chronically homeless. Therefore, we ought to treat housing as part of their medical treatment and make it just as much of an entitlement as any other thing. If you have a heart attack, you go in, you obviously, if you're on Medicaid, you get that service right away. Nobody questions it. The same should be for the housing for those people who are disabled based on their medical condition. So we allocated a bunch of money for it, and we've got a process to go around the state to develop projects across the state, not just in the 43rd district, but across the state, to literally over the next several years of housing thousands of folks who right now are suffering and dying on the street. Okay, this has got to be addressed in a very significant way. And the new dynamic is, again, linking healthcare with housing. That will help us make the case for this and get past the cynicism of local governments trying to deal with homelessness on their own. So I'm really excited about that, and I had a lot of support. It passed out of the House 96-2. Senate not so much, but it was pretty good. And thanks, Jamie, for your help on moving it along. But it's a real new dynamic that I'm really excited about. So, and if you want, we can talk more about that maybe at a future meeting. Thank you.
I want to compliment Frank on Apple Health and Homes, which really was remarkable. And we were super happy to see that policy go through the Senate. And Nicole, just let me mention one little piece of great work that Nicole did, which was to put into the operating budget funding that allows people who depend on Medicaid and are HIV positive to use the more expensive single pill regime, which will help them stay healthy. So I think it's a really smart investment, but that's something that we've been struggling with, and Nicole helped get that across the finish line. I want to mention a couple of policy things that haven't come up. One is that I worked this session on a bill that will allow Sound Transit to create enhanced service zones, such as the city of Seattle, and allow the voters of the city of Seattle to tax themselves more to get faster or improved service out of light rail. And I think the voters are hungry for that. There were almost 1,000 people who signed in, mostly organized by Seattle Subway. Thank you, Efren, in the Senate Transportation Committee, and then 2,000 people in the House Transportation Committee. So really broad hunger for going faster and more in terms of our transit investments. And I was happy to help create a new tool for that. The other thing that I want to say is that we made really dramatic progress, particularly for a short session, on gun violence, passing two significant but smaller bills, one that prohibits untraceable firearms, and one that prohibits both open carry and concealed carry at school board meetings and other local government meetings. And then one of the headline bills of the session was the ban on high capacity magazines, I think, which is going to keep all of us safer. And I was very proud to get that out of my committee last year and then to write the striking amendment that that made it across the Senate floor and then ultimately made it out of the House without any changes. And thank you to the House for enduring that long debate as their last bill on the cutoff date. But so there was a lot of, those are just examples of some of the really good things that were going on. I think, you know, in a short session, we have a lot to be proud of, and that doesn't take away from acknowledging that there's a lot more work to do when we reconvene. Thank you all for the support as we go through that work.
All right. Thank you all for taking this extra time with us tonight and answering questions from everybody. And for the work that you've done this past session too. I know that these sessions are always a long, hard slog. So thank you. All right. And with that, we will move on. All right. We are, where are we? I'd like to shift up the agenda a little bit if there's no objections here so that we can do the elections next. Just give a brief opportunity for people to object to moving this. Otherwise, I will move them. Any objections? Okay. We have PCOs that we need to appoint. We've got Manny Garcia, Mary Kylie Cranford, and Matthew Mitnick. I am wondering if there is any objection to electing them by unanimous consent. I'll ask 2 more times. Raise your hand if you object.
Can you repeat what you're asking, please?
We have 3 people who we would like to elect into PCO positions: Manny Garcia, Mary Kylie Cranford, and Matthew Mitnick. And so I am asking whether there's any objections to electing them via unanimous consent. I'll ask 1 more time. Any objections? All right. Congratulations, Manny, Mary Kylie, and Matthew. We will elect you by unanimous consent. The next position that we need to elect is a membership chair. We are in need of a membership chair to help us build membership here. Do we have a nomination for membership chair? Tara?
Yeah, I nominate James Williams.
Do we need a second for this?
I don't think so.
I'll second if that's needed.
Okay. James, do you want to? Well, let me ask this first. Do we just want to do an unanimous consent, or do we want to hear from James first before we?
I'd like to hear from James.
Okay, James, you want to speak for a minute or two?
Yeah, sure. Hi, yeah,
Thanks.
I'm James Williams. I've been a longtime member of the 43rd. I'm actually a second generation Seattleite. I was born here in Seattle, and I was vice chair for technology quite a few years ago now, I guess.
Oh, James, I think we lost your audio.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry, James, we lost the last bit of your the last bit of what you said. The audio cut out.
Okay, I'm not sure where it cut out, but yeah, I look forward to helping to build and engage our membership. So be honored to have your support. Thank you.
Okay. All right. With any other nominations? All right. With that, any objections to electing James Williams as membership chair by unanimous consent? That's 2 more times. Any objections? Any objections? All right, seeing none, we will elect James as membership chair. Congratulations, James. Look forward to working with you on the board as we continue to build up the 43rd, particularly in the wake of redistricting, which has taken many of our dear members out to other districts. Next up, we need to elect a King County Democratic Central Committee alternate. Do we have any nominations for
Yes.
that?
Sorry. I am thrilled to nominate Sophia Lee.
All right. Are there any other nominations? Okay, Sophia, do you want to talk for a minute or two?
Yeah, sure. I will say a little bit about myself. Hi, my name is Sophia Lee. I am a transgender woman who lives in the 43rd district. I lived in Seattle the last 8 years or so, and throughout that time, I've always lived in the 43rd, which I'm particularly proud of. I have been very involved in the community for a while now. I have been particularly involved in fighting for women's rights and transgender rights. I have been involved, or I have been the board chair of Gender Justice League, a trans civil and human rights organization for several years, in which I have helped fight off the various different anti-trans bills and initiatives, and I've been involved with a lot of other things. I hope to be able to join and also to help continue to push for progressive issues within the district.
Thank you. With no other nominations, are there any objections to electing Sophia via unanimous consent? All right, I'll ask 2 more times. Any objections? Any objections to nominating Sophia via unanimous consent? Okay, seeing none, congratulations, Sophia. Glad to have you on board. Let me share my screen again. All right, moving back up here. Okay, the Democratic State Convention is coming up. First up, we've got the caucus on March 26th. This is not this weekend, but it is the following weekend. We need people to volunteer to be delegates to the state convention. We need people to come to the caucus and vote for those delegates. So this means all of you. We would love to have your attendance at the convention. You can see all the information about the convention, about the caucus, sorry, about the caucus here at the link I just put in chat that I've got highlighted on the screen here. The caucus is March 26th. We're starting at 10 a.m. until we're done. The more on schedule we can stay, the faster we'll be done with it. The convention is Saturday, June 25th. You can attend in person in Tacoma or via remote. Let's see, so who can be a delegate? Anyone who is a resident of the 43rd can be a delegate. So that means all of you who are residents of the 43rd can be delegates. You do not have to be a member of the 43rd District Democrats to be a delegate. So you can invite your friends, neighbors, coworkers, dog sitters, etc. To vote for a delegate, you do need to be a 43rd member. The deadline for that passed back in February 24th. But we do need people who are 43rd members to show up. So please do so. Look for mail coming on this shortly with a call for the meeting. Link again to where you can sign up to be a delegate. We need a total of 33 delegates and 17 alternates. There is a set of demographics that we've been asked to meet by the state party. We are happy to do so. I've got the list here of the counts. So again, please sign up to be a delegate. Find good Democrats to join you in being a delegate. Delegate responsibilities. We will be proposing amendments to the state platform, proposing resolutions for the state party to adopt. We can work with other legislative districts on that. Attend the convention, whether remote in person, like I said, help plan for the 2022 federal and state elections. There will be a requirement if you're a delegate to have some meetings between March 26th and the state convention in order to do the planning on resolutions and amendments. Yes, Tara. Terry, you're on mute.
Sorry, did I raise my hand because I was accident?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, it looked like you did. Maybe I misunderstood. Maybe not. I might be misreading Zoom. Sorry. Any questions about the?
Yeah, we have a question.
Yeah.
Are people who are being redistricted in new district or old district for the caucus? So if they've been redistricted out of the 43rd, where do they caucus?
It is the new district. So you need to be in the 43rd now to caucus with the 43rd. And so if you are living in the if you're living in an area that is now in one of the other legislative districts, you should caucus with that legislative district.
Sounds good. And it looks like we have Linda has her hand up.
Yes, Linda.
Back in the old days, I'm going to reveal my age, there were congressional district caucuses, et cetera, et cetera. It looks like there's just legislative district and then state convention. Is that correct?
Yes, this year we've got the legislative district caucus, and then that goes directly to the state convention.
And who set the schedule for when those would take place? Was that done by the state?
When the caucus and the state convention are?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's set by the state.
Because in the past, there's been some discussion about the fact that it always falls on Saturday. It falls on Saturday morning, and that is a conflict for people who are observant Jews and also for Jehovah's Witnesses. So I'm disappointed this year that both are on Saturday mornings instead of alternating.
We will take that feedback back to the state committee.
Yeah, I'll just pop in.
Again.
I will pass that along, Linda. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah, can I hop in just real brief on the congressional caucus?
Mm-hmm.
That's only, the congressional caucus is only in presidential years because the business of the congressional district caucus is delegate selection. So in the non-presidential years, it's only legislative district caucus to select delegates for the state convention.
Thanks for that correction.
Will?
Yes, so my question was, in previous years, 43rd District PCOs were automatically delegates unless they chose not to be. Has that practice changed? And if so, do they need to file?
I don't recall that ever being the case.
When you actually run the caucuses?
Not at this level, no.
Well, I mean, so you're saying that by doing away with the precinct caucuses, we're short-circuiting that one?
The non-presidential years were always just legislative district caucuses to select. Well, actually, that's not true. Several years ago, there were still token precinct caucuses, but they did not actually do that much. I don't remember PCOs ever being automatic delegates. There's more PCOs than there are delegate slots that for the state convention. There may have been coming out of.
Oh, no, I'm not referring to state delegates. I'm referring to delegates to within the caucus itself when.
Yeah, so this.
That's right, we got rid of congressional.
The rules are that to be a delegate, you have to submit your name to run as a delegate to represent the 43rd at the state convention.
Okay, so it's
there's a simple form that you if you follow the link that I put in the chat,
yeah,
you click through there, put your name in the form that's linked from there.
Will, are you asking about who is eligible to vote and participate at the LD caucus?
No, I know that automatically you can participate because you are already there. But the question is, so we're only having county and state caucuses or conventions. And therefore, we're only electing delegates to the state, but we're not electing delegates to the county. Is that correct?
There is no county this year.
Oh, so it's only state. Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, any other questions? Okay, the next thing then is we've got, and maybe I'll boost the size of this as well, and I will put this into the chat. We have the rules for the caucus here. Yes, Tara.
Oh, I was going to propose an amendment, which you might already know.
To the rules?
Yeah.
Okay, let's just hold off on that for a second. So we've got the rules here. These are rules that were suggested by the state in order to run the caucus in a remote Zoom-only environment. I can walk through them very quickly. It has anyone over the age of 18 as of the election. We have some housekeeping stuff around who runs the caucus, the people who can vote, how we challenge vote, who is able to vote and not, how we choose the delegates, if there's not enough, if we haven't met our quota of delegates, that's a little bit of a pro forma thing. Voting, if we do voting, is using Google form method, something similar to what you're aware of from our votes here in the 43rd. And then an opportunity for us to discuss further business around things we might be interested in for amendments and amendments to the state platform and sorry, I'm drawing a blank. It's late. Sorry. My mind is just, I've just lost my mind, people. Tara, you have an amendment you would like to make?
There was a email from the state party which came late today, so you might not have read it, but it said that the 18-year-old restriction is actually incorrect from what they sent out. So unless we want to restrict, we can just take that out and change to cut everything from publicly identify as a Democrat.
So there is no age restriction for running as a delegate.
There is no age restriction for running as a delegate.
Okay.
If Tara's moving that amendment, I will definitely second it in the interest of time.
Okay. All right. Any objections to unanimous consent for that? Second question. Sorry. Yes, Linda? You're on mute.
I object to unanimous consent. I don't want 1-year-olds voting. And I know that's not the intent, but.
All right, Tara, do you want us to go to a vote?
Well, it's not my choice. If someone, unless we want to discuss the difference between affirmation and unanimous consent, I can find, if we wish to discuss it, I can try to find the mail from state. Which I can't right now, but well, let's start getting ready for a vote then. It's not my call if we vote or not.
I don't see the purpose of removing the age suggestion there. Is there a reason for removing it? We're talking about representing the district. We're talking about stirring voters and participating in the democratic process. Why is it that we want to change this at this time?
To remove?
Yeah.
Well, because it actually is not a restriction of the state party, which is where the rules template came from, and to actually get conceivably like some 16, 17-year-olds involved, which we have previously had younger delegates.
If I may make a.
If I can pop in, I'll suggest too that the state party's affirmative action wants us to meet the threshold of younger delegates, some of them being under the age of 18 actually, within that affirmative action kind of like threshold that we want to meet for delegates. So like just removing the age of 18 being the minimum would allow us to actually meet that affirmation goal for like 16-year-old delegates, for example.
Julie, I see your hand raised.
And I apologize, I may not have voice in this body, but to clear it up, part of the reason that the DSAP accidentally did not include the customary clause that to be a delegate to the state convention, you needed to be 18 on or before election day. It actually said you had to be 18 as of the date of the caucus, which was wrong. And so that's the reason that it came up at the state level. But then in looking through the DSAP, this year's DSAP has no age requirement whatsoever. So each individual district could potentially put their own age requirement in. And one that might be a compromise option is that now that 16 and 17-year-olds can pre-register, maybe just simply say, maybe make it 16. But this whole kerfuffle was caused due to an inadvertent omission in the drafting of the DSAP.
Linda, would that be acceptable to you if Tara were to amend her amendment to say 15, 16?
Yeah, I'd be fine with 15. Because we're talking about election day and this is talking about time of the caucus. So I think we should lower it from 18.
Tara?
Yeah, that's fine. I don't imagine we'd get many younger than 15.
Okay, so the amendment would be to replace 18 with 15 in this.
Yeah, technically that's an amendment to an amendment, but I don't think we have objection to that, but just make sure.
Any objections to amending the amendment to say 15 rather than 18, or 15 rather than strike the age requirement entirely? Any objections? Any objections? Any objections? All right. Let me just do this immediately. All right, looking now at that amendment here, can we accept this via unanimous consent? Once. Second opportunity to object. Third opportunity. Seeing no objections, we will take that amendment. Thank you. Are there any other amendments people have? And let me also say there will be one final, we have to also adopt these rules directly by the caucus on March 26th as well. So there will be one other option to tweak the rules. Any other motions for amendments? Okay. Is everyone ready to adopt these rules for the caucus via unanimous consent? Any concerns? Any objections? One more time. Any objections? All right, thank you. We've adopted these rules via unanimous consent. Right. Let's see. Blah, blah, blah. So that takes us through there. Do we have time for the bylaw change? We are at 9 o'clock. I want to be respectful of time as well. Very briefly, the bylaw change, sorry, let me, I have a very large monitor, so my apologies for those of you who are unable to read that. The bylaw change effectively says that for people who were a member in another legislative district who move into the 43rd, that they do not have to undergo the standard waiting period to become a full member of the 43rd. This is important for two reasons. One, redistricting, but also 43rd has a high number of renters. And so in order to be more inclusive and welcoming of people who are moving into the 43rd, who were previously members in another legislative district, this smooths that path for them to join as members. To be clear, if you are not a member of another legislative district and you move into the 43rd and you join, there is still the standard 10-day waiting period. Any questions on this from anyone? Tara, it looked like you were about to say something.
No, no.
Oh, okay. All right. Do we need a motion here to vote? And do we have quorum? I'm assuming I'm hoping, but I do not know if we still have quorum.
How many PCOs do we have on?
Last I checked, the count was 15, although that was before, that was earlier in the meeting that I was checking.
Anne Marie, I see your hand. Just give us a second here. Everyone who is a PCO, if you could raise your hand so we could do a count. Is that everybody? So that puts us at 11 with me. So we
That
do
is
not
4
have.
short of quorum.
Yeah, so we do
Connie Voggett is a PCO. Is she still on? I didn't see her hand raised.
I see her name.
It's possible folks didn't hear the call to raise their hands. And is Jessie Marie still on?
Yeah, maybe we keep those hands up, but but repeat it a couple times just in case.
Yeah, if you are a PCO in the 43rd, please raise your hand. We're trying to make sure we have enough PCOs to have quorum so that we can vote on this change. Right now we've got 11, 12 with me. So we need 3 more. All right, we've got 13. Are there 2 more?
I'll just jump on to the person who DM'd me. I just want to make sure if you have not raised your hand, please raise your hand, and then we can count you in the official count. If anyone is having troubles raising their hand, happy to walk them through it. It's relatively simple, but it can be hidden there if you're looking at the interface or something.
Is this a PCO only vote?
It is a bylaws amendment, so yes, it is a PCO only vote.
Thank you.
And Jessie Murray is joining in just a moment. She's another PCO.
Okay.
Thank you. And let's just make sure that we keep those hands up. I saw that we went from 12 to 11. So we'll just make sure that it might take us a minute to get there, but if you are a PCO, please keep your hand raised, and that'll help us get an accurate count. Thank you so much.
Cody, are you able to text Connie Voggett or call her really quick, maybe?
Yeah, good call. Yeah, honestly, I should have done that earlier. I'll do that now.
Okay, while we're waiting on that, Emery, you had a question?
Yeah, so the change that we're talking about here, I believe you're saying that people that were in other districts are now in ours in the 43rd, and you're removing the 10-day kind of waiting period, et cetera. Are they effectively members of the 43rd as of today, or what date? And the reason I'm asking is because there was a date in the previous discussion that you needed to be part of the 43rd by, was it February 24th, in order to participate in the caucus?
Paul, do you want me to take it? I can, since it's my amendment.
Well, I think there was some state rule. Yeah, go ahead. But I think there was some state rule about this for the purpose of the caucus.
So yeah, as far as the bylaws amendment goes, they would become members and be able to vote as soon as they paid applicable dues. So essentially, you could think of these people as the same as a renewing member of the 43rd. You know, if you were a 43rd member last year and you pay dues this year, you can vote immediately. You don't have to wait 10 days. This amendment essentially levels the playing field between people who've been in the 43rd for a while and people who have just been dropped into the 43rd because they moved or because of redistricting.
That sounds sane. Thank you.
That was a good question. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm just going to jump into here, Anne Marie. I think that so to be a delegate, we don't have to look at that February 24th membership deadline, but to be able to vote at the caucus is the February 24th. So you can run as a delegate and be a part of the 43rd and not be a member with voting. Am I saying this right, Tara and Paul?
Kind of.
Yeah,
anyone who is a resident of the 43rd can run to be a delegate. You don't have to be a member of the 43rd at all, even as a delegate. To vote, you need to be a member of the 43rd. And that the cutoff date for that was February 24th. There is this carve out for people who are members of other legislative districts who will. My understanding is that if you're a member of another district and you're redistricted into the 43rd, that as long as you join the 43rd, you will be able to vote because you're continuing membership.
There's two different. There's two different things that I think we're talking about here that may be getting mixed up. There is the membership rules and requirements for the 43rd legislative district as laid out in our bylaws. That's what this amendment affects. Separate from that are whatever rules that the state is imposing around who can vote in caucuses and who can be a delegate. That's an entirely separate matter from what this amendment affects.
Yeah, and if I may, the automatic transfer over was only for PCOs, not for paid members, which the state has no say in. So that's the confusion there. So PCOs who were mapped in are automatically members of the 43rd or whatever LD they are in. They are automatically members as of the day the maps went into effect, which was early February. But paid members who are not PCOs, the state did not make any statement about.
Julianne, did you have your hand to say something?
I think maybe I better keep it to a sidebar.
Okay.
And if I could coordinate with you and Tara afterwards.
Sure. Yeah. All right. Do we have our 15?
We're at 13. And Paul, can you confirm for me, because I know you're a PCO as well, in addition to being chair. Is your hand up as well, or is it 13 plus 1?
My hand is not currently up. I don't.
Paul's hand isn't up and Jesse's hand isn't up. Oh,
think that
Jesse's
I
just
can.
up. So we're at 15 exactly.
We are
right?
now at 15.
Yeah.
Nicole is a new PCO and does not have her hand up.
Okay.
Okay.
I'd like to make a motion to move to a vote on this.
All right.
Can we do unanimous consent on this and just get this taken care of while we got the people?
Yes, okay, so we have the motion to adopt this bylaw amendment. Will somebody give me a second?
A second.
Any objections to passing this via unanimous consent? Any objections? And last, any objections? All right. Thank you all. We have passed this via unanimous consent.
Awesome. Thank you, folks. This is just a little bit of basically cleanup adjustment in our bylaws. It's going to continue to make things a little smoother and a little fairer for people. So thank you for entertaining this.
All right. We do have, y'all can put your hands down now. Thank you very much. Tara, we should do the chair and vice chair confirmation.
Yes, we do have at least one. We have one new PCO, newly redistricted in PCO present. Yay.
Okay.
Welcome to her.
So I am hoping we still have our PCO quorum. With the redistricted, with the redistricting, we must provide the option for PCOs to either confirm myself and Tara as chair and co-chair, or request for an election of new chair and co-chair.
Also the KCD reps.
Oh, and the King County
Yeah.
reps as well. So we are providing an opportunity here for PCOs to make that call. And Amy, I see your hand is still up. I don't know if that was from prior or.
It was from prior, sorry.
Okay. Is there any interest in holding a chair and vice chair election tonight? And one more time, any interest in holding chair and vice chair? Okay, thank you. We'll move on. Committee reports. Camille, hopefully you're still on. I know that you had a bunch of other obligations. Is Camille still on? I can't see everybody. No, it looks like Camille is not on. Dawn, you want to?
Camille had a couple things she just requested that we put in the chat, so I'll throw that in there.
All right, thank you, Kelsey. Dawn, mutual aid?
Yes, 1 second. Getting it ready. The Mutual Aid Subcommittee realizes that Mayor Bruce Harrell has caused extreme duress upon the unhoused and many housed community members with his exceedingly zealous approach regarding the sweeps and unhoused encampments. I would like to include Stop the Sweeps statement for anyone willing to read it and highlight the following paragraph. The sudden sweep near City Hall was in violation of several national laws and city regulations. By its own internal regulation, the city must publicly post 72 hours notice before a sweep, plus they must repost after 7 days of the sweep if is rescheduled. By law, under Martin v. Boise decision, as affirmed by the Ninth Circuit Court, and by the U.S. Supreme Court, the city is not allowed to enforce anti-camping ordinances when there are not enough indoor housing or shelter spaces for unhoused populations in the area, and that the fallacious use of the term obstruction is being abused. The use of that term is supposed to mean that the tent or encampment is causing an emergency, which would release city officials from their obligation to give 72 hours notice or offer alternative shelter. Mayor Bruce Harrell plans on doing a daily sweep every day in April if there are no shelter spots available for most of our unhoused neighbors. This is insanity upon human torture. We would like to fiscally support Stop the Sweeps as much as possible, and ask for anyone in the 43rd to support scofflaw mitigation with vehicles desperately need people power support, the Give a Damn Collective and People Power in Stop the Sweeps, Give a Damn Collective and Seattle Food Not Bombs. I'd also like to add that if there's anyone you know of, or if you yourself need free, high-quality organic food, Seattle Food Not Bombs offers the free market at Cascadia Park, and clients and volunteers would be welcome every Sunday from 1:30 to 3 p.m. Stop the Sweeps desperately needs people power, usually morning shifts from 8:45 to 12 p.m., as well as food, tent, and tarp donations. If you could directly DM them on their Instagram account. We, as the future 43rd Mutual Aid Subcommittee, have voted to donate the entirety of this monthly allotment to sweep support, 250 to Stop the Sweeps directly, and then 2 other mutual aid organizations for sweep support in addition. And that is my report.
Thank you very much. We've put the policy committee report in the chat, so direct your attention to that. Amy has asked that we skip the state committee report, and Ephraim is saying we can skip the King County Democratic report. I'll ask both of them to type up something short and we can send it out. We can add it into the meeting notes for people to review offline, if that's okay with everybody. Okay. And with that, we move to last item, which is new business and good of the order. Is there anything from anyone here? Let's see.
Yeah, I got a good of the order.
Yeah, okay. And then Tara, I'll see your hand up. I don't know if you were wanting to say something as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, John, go ahead.
Yeah, I would just like to say that we are headed for a harrowing electoral season. It seems like the Democrats are pretty weak, and that a big chunk of the Republican Party is now fascist. It's not conservative. There are a number of anti-Trump Republicans that have been voting Democrat, and in certain areas of the state, Democrats never win. So why not create a coalition with these anti-Trump Republicans? And the other thing is, I think that in the discussion of the environment and economics, it's time. I know this is just on a local, more that level that you're talking about, but the idea of an industrial policy has never been more important. Because China is kicking our ass in the economic realm. They are basically taking over the world economy, and they're using an industrial policy to do it. And this concept of the industrial policy has to be more consciously embraced by the party. And I definitely don't see the Republicans do it. They think you just let capitalism do whatever it wants to do. But I think this is very important as far as the green transition. And in terms of armaments being built up now, because the post-Cold War world is over with. Vladimir Putin has pretty much demolished the idea that we can just expect global economics to maintain peace. That's over with.
Okay, thank you, John. Mm-hmm. Anyone else for good of the order? All right, and with that, I motion we adjourn. Okay, thank you, everyone. Thank you for the extra time tonight. I know we went over. Thank you for bearing with us. Thank you for the questions for our representatives and for some of the housekeeping work that we had to get done. And look for a mail from our official 43rd email about the state convention and the caucus coming up. Look for that shortly. We do need people to run as delegates and to participate in that caucus. And with that, thank you very much, everyone, and good night.
Night.
Good night.
You got it. Let's just end this one and come back in just to make sure we're, yeah, I'll post. Yeah, let's do that. Okay.
Thanks. Bye.
Yeah, thanks.
Paul, how am I going to get a hold of you? And oh, Tara's coming already.
I will shoot you an email.
Okay.